Imagine this. A person sitting quietly in their home suddenly bursts into flames. No apparent ignition source, no accelerant, no logical explanation. When the fire is extinguished, investigators find something that defies all known laws of physics. The victim's body has been reduced to ash, yet the room around them shows minimal damage. The chair they sat in? Barely scorched. This is spontaneous human combustion, and it's one of the most terrifying and controversial phenomena in forensic science. Today, we're diving deep into 6 of the most documented, most bizarre, and most unexplainable cases of people who apparently ignited from within. Cases that have baffled scientists, challenged our understanding of fire dynamics, and left investigators with more questions than answers. On the morning of July 2, 1951, in St. Petersburg, Florida, landlady Pansy Carpenter went to deliver a telegram to her tenant, 67-year-old Mary Hardy Reeser. When she touched the doorknob to Mary's apartment, it was scorching hot. She immediately called for help. When police and firefighters entered the apartment, they discovered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the middle of the room sat a blackened circle, about 4 feet in diameter. Within that circle were the remains of Mary's chair, reduced to springs and charred framework. And Mary herself? Almost nothing remained. All that was left of Mary Reeser was her left foot, still wearing a satin slipper, her skull, which had been shrunk to the size of a baseball, and a small pile of ashes weighing approximately 10 pounds. Everything else had been completely incinerated. But here's what made this case absolutely bizarre. The apartment showed almost no fire damage beyond that 4-foot circle. A pile of newspapers just feet away from the chair remained untouched. The walls were covered with a greasy soot, but there was no structural damage. Candles on the mantelpiece had melted, but not fallen. A mirror on the wall had cracked from heat, but the curtains nearby were fine. The FBI was called in. They conducted extensive investigations. To completely cremate a human body requires temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for several hours. Industrial crematoriums struggle to achieve this. Yet somehow, in Mary's small apartment, her body had been reduced to ash while barely damaging the room around her. Investigators examined every possibility. Had she fallen asleep while smoking? Her cigarettes were found across the room, untouched. Was there an accelerant? None was found. Could someone have murdered her and set her on fire? There was no evidence of forced entry or struggle, and the pattern of burning made no sense for an external fire. The official conclusion was that Mary had fallen asleep while smoking. Her nightgown caught fire, and her body fat acted as fuel in what they called a wick effect. But this explanation had massive holes. The wick effect requires an external flame source and produces much more smoke and room damage than was present. It also doesn't explain the intense, localized heat required to nearly vaporize her bones. Dr. Wilton Krogman, a renowned physical anthropologist and expert on the effects of fire on the human body, examined the case. His conclusion? I find it hard to believe that a human body, once ignited, will literally consume itself, burn itself out, as does a candle wick, guttering in the last residual pool of melted wax. The temperature at which the body was consumed must have been incredibly high. Yet the room showed minimal damage. Mary Reeser's case remains one of the most documented and puzzling instances of spontaneous human combustion. And it was far from the last. Not all cases of spontaneous human combustion end in death, and perhaps none is more remarkable than the case of John O'Connor from London, England in 1985. John was a 23-year-old construction worker, healthy and athletic. On the evening of November 15th, he was at a disco with friends. Around midnight, John stepped outside for some air. What happened next was witnessed by multiple people and recorded by security cameras. John was standing alone, leaning against a wall, when suddenly his entire body erupted in flames. Not his clothes catching fire. Witnesses described it as flames emerging from his skin itself, particularly concentrated around his torso and arms. John screamed and began running, which only made the flames worse. Security staff immediately grabbed fire extinguishers and put out the flames within seconds. John was rushed to the hospital with severe burns covering 40% of his body. But here's what made this case extraordinary and terrifying. Investigators examined John's clothing. His shirt and jacket showed burn damage, but they hadn't been the source of the flames. The burning pattern was wrong. The damage radiated outward from his skin, not inward from an external source. His clothes showed more heat damage on the inside than the outside. Police investigated thoroughly. There were no accelerants on John's clothing or skin. He hadn't been near any open flames. He hadn't been smoking. The disco had no gas leaks or electrical faults. Security footage showed him standing alone, not near any heat source, when the combustion occurred. John himself had no memory of what triggered it. One moment he was feeling fine. The next he was engulfed in flames. He reported feeling extremely hot seconds before the ignition, like his body temperature was spiking internally. Medical examinations revealed something unusual. John's core body temperature when he arrived at the hospital was still abnormally elevated, even accounting for the burns. Doctors noted this was inconsistent with external burning, where core temperature typically drops as the body goes into shock. John survived but was left with permanent scarring and a mystery that doctors couldn't solve. What could cause a healthy young man to suddenly burst into flames from the inside out? Theories ranged from rare metabolic disorders to buildup of flammable gases in the body, but none fully explained what happened. The most disturbing part? John reported that in the weeks leading up to the incident, he'd been experiencing strange symptoms: extreme thirst, excessive sweating, and a persistent feeling of internal heat. He'd seen a doctor, but tests showed nothing abnormal. 5 years later, in 1990, John experienced another episode. He was at home alone when he felt the same internal burning sensation. This time, he immediately jumped into a cold shower. Small flames appeared on his arms and chest, but were quickly extinguished by the water. He was treated for minor burns, but once again, no cause was found. John O'Connor lived in constant fear after that. He kept fire extinguishers in every room of his house. He avoided situations where he was far from water. And he never got answers about why his body seemed to spontaneously ignite. While modern cases benefit from forensic science and documentation, historical accounts of spontaneous human combustion are equally compelling and often more mysterious. One of the earliest well-documented cases dates back to 1731 in Cesena, Italy. Countess Cornelia Zangari Bandi was 62 years old, in good health, and living a comfortable life in her villa. On the morning of March 15th, her maid entered the Countess's bedroom and discovered a scene straight from a nightmare. The room was filled with a thick, yellowish smoke that had a greasy, unpleasant odor. The floor was covered in a sticky, oily residue. And in the middle of this horror scene were the remains of the Countess. Her body had been almost completely destroyed. Her legs from the knees down remained intact, still wearing her stockings. Her head was found partially intact between the legs. 3 fingers remained. Everything else had been reduced to a pile of ash. The intensity of the heat required to achieve this destruction was incomprehensible for the 18th century. But again, the surrounding room showed minimal damage. The bed, just 4 feet from where she'd combusted, was barely singed. A candle on a nearby table had melted, dripping wax everywhere, but hadn't fallen over. The furniture showed no charring. Windows weren't broken from heat. The case was investigated by the prominent scientist Giuseppe Bianchini, a prebendary of Verona. His detailed report described the scene and concluded that the Countess had died by spontaneous combustion generated by an internal combustion of vapors within the body. This was revolutionary thinking for 1731. Bianchini theorized that a buildup of flammable vapors from alcohol consumption, combined with the Countess's habit of rubbing camphorated alcohol on her body for medicinal purposes, had somehow ignited internally. Modern scientists have examined Bianchini's report and remain puzzled. The 18th century investigator was surprisingly thorough, ruling out murder, accident, and lightning strike. The pattern of burning, the intense localized heat, and the minimal environmental damage all point to something that shouldn't be possible. What makes the Countess Bondi case particularly significant is its early documentation. This was an urban legend or folklore. It was investigated by respected scientists of the era and documented in medical journals. It established a pattern that would be seen in hundreds of cases over the next 3 centuries. One of the most compelling arguments for spontaneous human combustion comes from cases where the event was directly witnessed. In 1964, in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, Helen Conway's case provided exactly that kind of evidence. Helen was a 69-year-old woman living alone in her home. On the evening of November 8th, her neighbor, whose townhouse was attached to hers, was watching television when he smelled something burning. He initially dismissed it as someone burning leaves outside. But the smell grew stronger, and he noticed smoke seeping through the shared wall. He immediately called the fire department and rushed next door. Through the window, he could see into Helen's living room. What he witnessed would become one of the most controversial eyewitness accounts in the history of spontaneous human combustion. Helen was sitting in her chair, and blue flames were dancing across her entire body. Not orange flames from burning cloth or hair. The witness specifically described them as blue, indicating extremely high temperature combustion. Helen appeared to be already deceased, not moving or reacting to the flames consuming her. The fire department arrived within 3 minutes. When they entered, Helen's body was still burning, though the flames had diminished. Once extinguished, they found she'd been severely burned. But unlike many SHC cases, her body wasn't completely incinerated. This was because the fire was caught early. What made this case remarkable was the witness testimony combined with the physical evidence. The chair Helen sat in was damaged but not destroyed. The carpet beneath showed burn marks, but not extensive damage. The walls behind her were blackened but not burned through. And critically, there was no ignition source anywhere near her. Fire investigators conducted extensive analysis. Helen didn't smoke. There were no candles or lamps near her chair. The electrical wiring was inspected and found to be in perfect condition, with no shorts or faults. The house had no gas leaks. There was nothing that could have started the fire externally. The autopsy revealed Helen had died before the burning became severe, likely from shock or cardiac arrest as the combustion began. Toxicology found no accelerants, no unusual chemicals, nothing that would explain the fire. What frustrated investigators most was the blue color of the flames the witness reported. Blue flames indicate very high temperature combustion, typically associated with burning gases. Human body fat, clothing, and furniture burn with yellow-orange flames. What could produce blue flames hot enough to consume human tissue? One theory proposed was that methane gas, produced naturally in the intestines, had somehow accumulated and ignited. But this would require an ignition source and would likely produce an explosion, not the sustained burning that was witnessed. Another theory involved the breakdown of body fat into flammable ketones during certain metabolic conditions. But again, this didn't explain the ignition or the intense localized heat. The official cause of death was listed as fire of undetermined origin, making Helen Conway's case one of the strongest arguments for the causal reality of SHC. In 1986, Crown Point, New York, became the site of one of the most thoroughly investigated cases of spontaneous human combustion in modern times. George Mott, a 58-year-old retired fireman, was found dead in his bedroom under circumstances that defied explanation. George's son came to visit on the morning of March 24th. When George didn't answer the door, his son used his key to enter. He found his father's bedroom door closed but noticed a strange smell. Opening the door, he discovered a scene that would puzzle forensic scientists for years. George Mott's body was on the floor beside his bed. His torso and head had been almost completely incinerated, reduced to ash and fragmented bone. His legs from the mid-thigh down were intact. One arm remained, reaching upward as if frozen in the moment of death. But as with all classic SHC cases, the room told an impossible story. The mattress George had apparently been lying on showed a burn mark, but it hadn't caught fire itself. A plastic phone on the bedside table, less than 2 feet from George's head, had melted slightly but hadn't ignited. To generate the heat necessary to nearly cremate his torso would require temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, everything in the room should have been consumed. The autopsy revealed something unusual. George's internal organs showed signs of extreme heat exposure, but his blood contained no carbon monoxide. This suggested he died very quickly, possibly before smoke inhalation could occur. Toxicology was clean. He didn't smoke and had been in good health. The official death certificate listed probable spontaneous human combustion as the cause of death, a rare acknowledgement by authorities that something beyond normal fire dynamics had occurred. George Mott's case remains one of the most forensically documented and scientifically puzzling instances of this phenomenon. Perhaps the most disturbing case of spontaneous human combustion occurred in 1982 in Edmonton, London, because it was witnessed by family members who could do nothing to stop it. Jeannie Saffin was a 61-year-old woman living with her elderly father. On the afternoon of September 15th, Jeannie was sitting in the kitchen when suddenly a flash of light appeared around her upper body. Within seconds, flames erupted from her mouth, nose, and the back of her head. Her father described it as if the fire was coming from inside her, bursting outward. He and Jeannie's brother-in-law rushed to extinguish the flames and called for an ambulance. Jeannie was rushed to the hospital with severe burns. She died 8 days later from her injuries without ever being able to explain what happened. The investigation revealed details that made the case even more inexplicable. Jeannie had been sitting completely still. She wasn't near the stove, she didn't smoke, and there were no open flames or electrical faults. The witnesses were adamant. The fire appeared to originate from inside Jeannie's body. The coroner's inquest returned an open verdict, unable to determine the cause of the fire. The phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion has been a subject of intense debate for centuries. Mainstream science largely dismisses it as impossible, insisting that every case has a rational, albeit sometimes hidden, explanation. Yet, The evidence from several well-documented cases presents a formidable challenge to outright skepticism. The core scientific argument against spontaneous human combustion, or SHC, is rooted in thermodynamics. The human body is roughly 60% water. To burn human tissue, you first have to evaporate that water, which consumes a tremendous amount of energy. Completely incinerating a human body requires sustained temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for several hours. Achieving such conditions within a standard room without incinerating the entire structure seems physically impossible. The most widely accepted scientific explanation for these strange fires is the wick effect. This theory posits that a victim's clothing acts as a wick, and their body fat serves as the fuel source, much like an inside-out candle. An external ignition source, like a cigarette or a spark, starts the process. Once ignited, the body can smolder for hours, slowly consuming itself. Dr. John DeHaan, a respected fire investigator and forensic scientist, conducted experiments that convincingly demonstrated this wick effect. Using a pig carcass wrapped in cloth, he showed that a small external flame could initiate a slow burn that lasted for hours, reducing much of the body to ash while causing surprisingly little damage to the immediate surroundings. The fat liquefies, soaks into the cloth, and provides a continuous fuel source. However, the wick effect theory has its own limitations and fails to account for the strangest aspects of many SHC cases. Firstly, it requires an external ignition source. In the cases of Helen Conway and Jeannie Safin, exhaustive investigations never uncovered any such source. Secondly, the wick effect is known to produce vast amounts of thick, greasy smoke and soot that would coat the entire room. Yet, many alleged SHC scenes show minimal smoke damage, often confined to a small area directly above the victim's remains. Third, the wick effect is a slow smoldering process that takes many hours. It's difficult to believe that a victim would not awaken, cry out for help, or attempt to extinguish the flames. Instead, many are found in seemingly peaceful or natural positions, showing no signs of a struggle. Dr. D.J.G., a lecturer in forensic medicine, studied over 200 reported cases. He concluded that while the wick effect could explain some, a distinct subset of incidents defied all conventional fire dynamics. These cases shared common traits: extremely localized burning, minimal damage to the surroundings, no identifiable ignition source, and evidence of incredibly rapid combustion. If we entertain the possibility that some cases cannot be explained by conventional science, what are the alternatives? One theory suggests a buildup of flammable gases like methane within the body's digestive system. However, this would likely cause an explosion rather than a sustained fire, and it still requires a spark to ignite it. Another hypothesis centers on rare chemical reactions. Certain metabolic disorders can lead to an accumulation of highly flammable ketones. In theory, a high concentration might create a combustible state, but the question of ignition remains unanswered. Some have even proposed exotic electrical or subatomic particle theories, but these are highly speculative and lack any scientific backing. The most unsettling aspect of SHC is its randomness. If it is a real phenomenon, we have no idea what causes it. Victims vary in age, health, and lifestyle. There is no common denominator, no way to predict or prevent it. Looking at hundreds of cases, a few baffling patterns emerge. Why are victims almost always found alone? Why is the fire so intensely localized, consuming a torso to ash while leaving feet and socks untouched just inches away? This defies the natural upward and outward spread of fire. And why is there so little smoke damage and, most crucially, so often no identifiable ignition source? For the families of victims like Mary Reeser, the lack of answers is a torment that compounds their grief. How do you find closure when investigators cannot explain what happened? For professionals, these cases represent a frustrating challenge to the very foundations of their expertise. So what is the verdict on spontaneous human combustion? The truth is, we don't know for sure. The majority of reported incidents are likely misinterpretations of the Wick effect, sparked by an overlooked cause. But a core group of well-documented cases, investigated by competent professionals, resists easy explanation. For these, we are left with three possibilities. Either the investigations missed a crucial piece of evidence, our understanding of science has significant gaps, or some mysteries are simply beyond our current ability to solve. Spontaneous human combustion remains an open question, not proven, but not entirely disproven. These cases are haunting reminders of our own fragility and the vastness of what we do and understand about our world and even our own bodies. The victims were ordinary people, and the sheer randomness of their fate is what makes these stories so deeply disturbing. Whether it is real or not, these mysterious fires leave behind a legacy of unanswered questions. Thank you for joining me on this disturbing journey through the flames of the unexplained. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of forensic science's most controversial mysteries, please like this video and subscribe for more investigations into the strange, the unexplained, and the impossible.